People think a palace floor is just a floor. It isn't. I learned that the hard way, standing post inside St. James's for almost 11 years. And if you told me back when I first put the bearskin on that I'd one day be able to tell a happy crowd from a grieving one just by listening to their shoes, I'd have laughed in your face. Probably gotten a bollocking for it too. But that's where this story starts, with sound, with a floor that wouldn't stop talking to me. My name doesn't matter much. Call me Harris. That's what the lads called me, Corporal Harris of the Coldstream 2nd Battalion, and for a long stretch of my service I was one of the rotating guards posted at ceremonial events across the royal estates. Buckingham, St. James's, sometimes Windsor when the staffing got thin. Indoor postings, the ones tourists never see properly. The thing about indoor guard duty nobody tells you, not in training, not in the mess, not even from the older lads who have done it for decades, is how quiet it gets. Outside on the forecourt you've got traffic, tourists shouting in 12 different languages, the click of cameras, the occasional idiot trying to make you flinch. Inside you've got marble, cold marble, and the kind of silence that hums in your ears until you start hearing things. I'd been doing indoor postings for maybe 4 years when I first noticed it. It was a Tuesday, November, one of those gray London afternoons where the sky looks like wet concrete and the chandeliers come on at 3 in the afternoon. There was a private investiture happening in one of the smaller state rooms, the kind of event where a few dozen people receive honors and there's tea after, low-key by palace standards. I was posted just outside the doors, standing at ease but expected to look like a statue. A woman walked past me toward the cloakroom. Older lady, maybe 70. She'd just come out of the ceremony, clutching a small velvet box like it was made of spun glass. And her shoes, just regular black court shoes, made this click on the marble. But the click sounded warm. I can't explain it better than that. It sounded warm, like the floor was glad she was there. 5 minutes later, another woman walked across the same patch of floor in identical shoes, and her steps sounded completely different. Sharper, almost angry. I looked up and saw her face was streaked with tears. Not happy tears, the other kind. Same floor, same shoes, different sound. I thought I was losing it. You don't tell anyone about something like that. Not in the regiment. Lads would have you on a fitness for duty review faster than you could say marble. So I kept it to myself. Filed it under tired brain, long shift, ignore it. And for about a week I genuinely did manage to ignore it. Then it happened again. State banquet, big one, heads of state, all the trimmings. I was on a corridor posting between the picture gallery and one of the antechambers. Hundreds of guests had walked past me over the course of the evening, and about halfway through I started picking up on it properly. The crowd going toward the dinner sounded one way. Excited, light, the kind of footfall that bounces a little. The same crowd coming back 2 hours later, after the toasts and the speeches and whatever had passed between them in there, sounded different, heavier, not tired heavy, something else, like the marble was absorbing something from them. I clocked it, properly clocked it this time, and once you notice something like that, you can't unnotice it. My oppo that night was a lad called Peter Mossley, Welsh Guards, good bloke, had a daughter the same age as mine. We did the walk down together at the end of shift, boots ringing in the empty corridor, and I almost said something. Got as far as opening my mouth. Then I thought about how it would sound out loud, and I closed it again. Peter noticed. He always did. He had a way of reading people that probably came from being the youngest of 6. Out with it, Harris. It's nothing. You've been chewing on something all night. I can see it in your jaw. We were in the changing area by then. I was undoing my chin strap and my hands had gone slow because my head was full. I sighed. I figured Peter, of anyone, would either get it or tell me to shut up and have a pint. Either way, fair enough. Floor sounds different, I said. He waited. The marble, in the corridors. It sounds different depending on what's going on in the room. Happy crowd, sad crowd, tense crowd. The footsteps come back different. Peter was quiet for a long second. Then he said, "Yeah." Just that, yeah. I looked at him. "You've noticed it too." "Course I have." He pulled his tunic off, hung it carefully. "Every lad who does indoor postings long enough notices it. You just don't talk about it. It's one of those things." "Why don't you talk about it?" He shrugged. "Because it sounds mad." "It does sound mad." "It does, but it's real." I stood there in my shirt sleeves, and I genuinely felt like the floor had shifted under me. Not because Peter had confirmed I wasn't going mad, though that helped. Because if a Welsh guard with 12 years in had been carrying this same thing around, then maybe the marble really did remember. Maybe the floor really was holding on to something. That conversation was in late November. By Christmas, I was hooked. I started paying attention to it the way you might pay attention to a foreign language you've started understanding by accident. The different events had different signatures. A garden party preparation, when staff were rushing about with chairs and linen, sounded chaotic but light. The marble seemed to almost laugh under it. A state funeral rehearsal, which I happened to be posted at once, sounded like the floor was holding its breath. The footsteps went in instead of off. Hard to describe unless you've heard it. The trickiest ones to read were the private family events, christenings, intimate birthdays, the small dinners where it was just family. Those had a different quality altogether. The marble would sound almost soft on the way in. Then on the way out, depending on what had happened, it would either keep that softness or it would change completely. There was one in mid-January that I'll never forget. It was supposed to be a small luncheon, 6 guests, all family, in one of the private dining rooms at Buckingham. I was on a corridor posting outside, standard stuff, no special protocol. Lunch had started at 1. 2 hours in, I started noticing the silence inside the room had changed. There weren't any raised voices, nothing dramatic, but the quality of the silence was different, heavier. Then a member of the household staff went in with a tray. She came out 3 minutes later and walked past me back toward the kitchens. Her shoes hit the marble like she was carrying lead. I'd seen that woman walk this same corridor probably 200 times. I knew her gait. Her steps were normally quick and almost musical. That afternoon, they sounded like a slow drum. I stood there at attention, eyes forward, and felt a knot form in my stomach. Something was wrong in that room. I didn't know what, but the marble had already told me. 20 minutes later, the lunch broke up early. The family came out one by one, and the sound of those footsteps walking away from that room is something I genuinely can't put into words. There was an older relative, very senior, who I'd seen plenty of times. She walked past me, and her shoes made a noise I'd never heard before in all my years on those floors. It was the sound of someone trying to look composed and failing on the inside. The marble caught every bit of it. I don't know what happened in that room. I never will. None of my business, and I wouldn't tell you even if I knew. But I remember thinking, walking off duty that night, I can read this place now. I can hear what's happening even when the doors are closed. That was the first time it scared me. Because here's the thing nobody talks about with these postings. You're trained to see threats. You're trained to read body language, watch hands, watch eyes, watch the doors. You're not trained to feel the building. And when you start doing that, when the building starts feeding you information you didn't ask for, it gets into your head in ways you can't shake. I went home to Maeve that night. She was reading on the sofa. I sat down next to her without saying anything. She looked at me over the top of her book. Bad shift. Strange one. She put the book down. Maeve was always good like that. She'd been married to me for 9 years by then. She knew when to push and when to leave it. You want a cuppa? Yeah, please. She made the tea. We watched some property show neither of us cared about. And I sat there on the sofa thinking about that older woman's footsteps and how the marble had sounded like it was grieving with her. I didn't sleep much that night. Spring came, things lifted. The marble seemed to lift with them. I'd been keeping a kind of mental log by then, though I'd never have written it down. Different events had different acoustic signatures. I started to be able to predict, sometimes, what kind of event was happening behind a door I hadn't been briefed on. I'd hear the prep footfall, hear the arriving footfall, and I'd think that's a celebratory event, that's a working visit, that's something diplomatic. I was right more often than I should have been. I'd mentioned bits of it to Peter over the months, and he'd nod, and we'd compare notes in the kind of half-joking way that men do when they're talking about something they actually take seriously. We never told anyone else. It was our thing. A little secret floor language between two blokes in bearskins. Then in April, something happened that I've thought about every single day since. It was a Thursday, state visit. A foreign head of state and his entourage were in the palace for a working session. Lots of staff movement, lots of officials, lots of guarded corridors. I was on a posting in one of the long galleries that connects two of the principal rooms. Long, narrow, lined with portraits. The marble in there is older than most of the building. Originally laid in the 1820s, I think. It has a particular sound to it, drier than the marble in the newer sections. Almost like old paper. The session had been going on for about an hour when I noticed the floor was telling me something I didn't want to hear. There was a small group of staff and officials going back and forth through the gallery, carrying papers, ushering aides, doing the usual choreography of these things. And one set of footsteps kept catching my ear. Male, heavy, walking slightly faster than the others. The first time he passed me, I didn't think much of it. Tall man, suit, lanyard, looked like he belonged. Could have been anyone. The second time, maybe 15 minutes later, I noticed his footfall was wrong. Hard to explain. Other people's footsteps had that purposeful but settled quality you get from people who belong somewhere. His had something else under it. The marble sounded different when his shoes hit it. Tenser. Like the floor knew something the rest of us didn't. I'd never been wrong about it before. Not in months of listening. And once that thought lodged, I couldn't shake it. He passed me a third time, and I clocked him properly. Mid-40s. Lanyard looked right, but I couldn't see the photo clearly from my angle. He was carrying a slim leather folder, and his right hand kept going to the inside of his jacket. Not the way you reach for a pen. The way you reach for something you're checking is still there. My heart rate picked up. You're trained not to act on a hunch. You're trained to escalate, to signal, to follow protocol. But you're also trained to trust the room. And right then the room, the marble, every old slab of it under his feet was telling me something was off. I waited until he was past me and out of sightline. Then I signaled. Small movement, just enough to catch the eye of the security officer at the far end of the gallery. He came over. I kept my eyes forward, kept my posture, and I said very quietly, "Gentleman in the dark suit, lanyard, leather folder. Just went into the south corridor. Worth checking." The officer didn't ask why. That's the thing about good ones. They don't need a reason. He just gave me a nod and moved off without making it look like he was moving off. What happened next, I only learned bits of later. The man wasn't who his lanyard said he was. The lanyard was real, but it had been issued to someone in the working delegation who had stayed back at the hotel that morning with food poisoning. The man in the gallery had either taken it or been given it, and he had walked into the palace as part of the wider entourage during the morning movement. He wasn't carrying anything dangerous. Let me say that clearly. There was no weapon, no device, nothing of that sort. But what was in that leather folder, what he was trying to do, ended up being the subject of a very long and very quiet investigation that I was not part of and was never told the details of. I gathered, eventually, that it involved documents, photographs, things that should not have left certain rooms. He was trying to access an area he should not have been able to reach, using a lanyard that should not have been around his neck, during a window when everyone's attention was on the principals in the main session. He was stopped before he got where he was going. And the only reason he was stopped, the only reason anyone clocked him at all in the moving sea of legitimate staff that day, was because his footsteps had sounded wrong to a Coldstream guard who'd spent 4 years listening to a marble floor. I didn't find out the full picture for weeks. The morning after it happened, I came in for my shift expecting either nothing at all or a quiet word from someone senior. What I got was a quiet word. Very quiet. A captain I knew slightly pulled me aside in one of the back corridors before parade, asked me to walk with him, and we did a slow lap of an empty wing while he asked me a series of questions in a tone that was somewhere between official and not. How had I noticed the man? What specifically had caught my attention? Had I seen the lanyard clearly? Had I seen his face? I answered everything honestly. Tall, mid-40s, dark suit, leather folder, lanyard worn slightly high on the chest. Hand going to the jacket interior more than was natural. I left out the marble bit. Couldn't see a way to explain that without sounding like I needed a long lie down. The captain nodded a lot. Didn't write anything down, which I noted. At the end he said, "You did the right thing yesterday, Harris. Keep it to yourself." "Sir?" "Properly to yourself, not even the wife." "Sir?" He walked off, and that was the closest I ever got to a debrief. I kept it to myself. Peter clocked something, though. He always did. We were doing a kit check a few days later, and he glanced at me sideways and said, "Heard there was a flap on Thursday." "Was there?" "Oh, news to me." He grinned. He didn't push. That was the other thing about Peter. He knew when to leave a thing alone. After the incident, I started noticing the marble even more. I couldn't help it. It was like someone had turned up a dial inside my head. Every shift, every corridor, every event, I was reading the floor without meaning to. And the more I read it, the more I realized how much was going on under the surface of these places. There was a children's event in May. Some kind of family-friendly thing, kids running around in the gardens, then a small reception inside for the families and the patrons. I was on a door posting near the reception, and the marble inside, when those kids came running across it, sounded like someone laughing. I'm telling you, that's the closest word I have for it. The floor sounded like it was laughing. Light, quick, unbothered. The kind of sound you only get when nobody in the room is pretending to be anything. Then a few days after that, I was on a posting near a room where a difficult meeting was happening. I don't know what the meeting was about. I had no need to know. But I could feel it through the floor. The footsteps in and out had that contained quality. Like the people were carrying things they couldn't put down. The marble felt tight. I don't know how else to say it. The slabs felt like they were braced. I started to wonder if maybe the floor wasn't doing anything special at all. Maybe I just got so practiced at reading footsteps that my brain was doing the heavy lifting, and I was projecting the rest onto the marble. That would be the rational explanation, the boring one. But here's the thing, I tried once to test it. There was an event being set up in one of the rooms. Staff only, no guests yet. Just chairs being arranged, flowers being placed, that kind of thing. I was on a corridor posting nearby. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, which you're not really meant to do but you can get away with for a moment, and I just listened. I tried to guess what kind of event it was based purely on the sound of the staff moving around inside. I guessed an evening drinks reception. Probably 40 to 50 guests. Probably something work-related but with a celebratory edge. When the event happened later that evening, I clocked the guests arriving. 46 people. Drinks reception. It was a launch event for a charitable initiative. I'd called it from the prep footfall. I told Peter about that. He just laughed and said, "Welcome to the club, Harris. You're proper broken now." He wasn't wrong. In June, my dad got ill. It came out of nowhere, the way these things do. He'd been fine at Easter, helping me put up a shed in the back garden, complaining about the instructions, drinking too much tea, being himself. Then in early June, my mum rang me at 6:30 in the morning and said the words you never want to hear. He had a stroke, a bad one. He survived, but he wasn't the same after. I took compassionate leave. Drove up to my parents' place, sat with him in the hospital, did all the things you do. He couldn't really talk for the first week. He'd look at me with one side of his face working and the other side gone, and I'd hold his hand and tell him about the kids and pretend I wasn't watching the man who taught me how to ride a bike disappear in pieces. When I came back to duty, I was wrecked. You're supposed to leave home at home. You're supposed to walk through the gates and be the uniform, not the person. And mostly I could do that. 11 years of training does something to your spine that holds you up even when the rest of you wants to fall over. But the marble heard me. I started noticing my own footsteps sounded different. The corridors I'd walked 1,000 times had a new note in them, and the note was coming from me. My own boots on the marble sounded heavier, sadder, and every time I clocked it, I'd think of my dad in the hospital bed, and I'd have to do that thing soldiers do where you push the feeling somewhere deep and put a lid on it. There was an older lad on duty with me one evening, name of Ramsay, been in even longer than Peter. Quiet bloke, not one for chatting. He came up to me during a changeover and stood next to me at the post for a minute before he spoke. "You've got something heavy on you, son." I didn't look at him. "It shows. Not in your face, in your walk." I waited. "You're hitting the floor different," he said, "like you're trying not to fall." I almost lost it right there, standing at attention with a bearskin on my head and a sword by my side. Some old Scots guard with grey at his temples and 40 years of service had read my whole life off my footsteps. I just said, "My dad." He nodded once. "Hard road, that." "Yeah. You take it one day, you hear me, one day." "Yes." He walked off. We never spoke about it again. But that was the moment I properly understood what I'd been hearing in the marble all those months. It wasn't magic. It wasn't the floor being mystical. It was people. People carry what they carry, and their bodies carry it for them, and their feet hit the floor according to what they're carrying. And in a place like that, with marble older than most countries, with corridors so quiet you can hear your own pulse, the floor amplifies it. The marble is just a microphone. The story is in the people. Ramsay had been a guard. He'd spent decades learning to read other people through their footsteps. He'd read me in 30 seconds. I started watching for it after that, watching how I sounded, watching how Peter sounded on the days his marriage was rough, watching how the household staff sounded on the mornings after late functions, watching the senior members of the family, watching the visiting dignitaries, watching everyone, not in a creepy way. In a "I am part of this building's nervous system now" way. The job had changed for me. In July, there was an event that I will carry with me until I die. It was a memorial, a private one, held for a family member of someone very senior, someone who had passed away earlier in the year after a long illness. I was on an indoor posting outside the room where the gathering was being held. Maybe 40 people inside. Family, close friends, a few household staff. The arriving footfall told me everything before the doors closed. People came in slowly, most of them in dark clothing, though not all. The shoes hitting the marble had that careful, don't make too much noise quality you get at any gathering of grief. The kind of footstep where people are trying to be respectful but the marble catches them anyway and tells you exactly how heavy they're feeling. There was one set of footsteps I caught straight away. A woman, older, walking with a stick. Her steps were slow and the stick made a small tap between each one. Tap, step, tap, step. The marble around her sounded like it was making space for her. I don't know how to describe that better. The other footfalls almost paused around hers, like the floor itself was respecting her right of way. She went into the room. The doors closed. The service began. I couldn't hear the words from where I was standing, only the murmurs. After about 40 minutes, things shifted. The door opened. People started coming out for the small reception in the adjacent room. And the same woman came out. But her footsteps were different now. The stick still tapped. The pace was still slow, but the weight of her tread had changed. It wasn't lighter. It wasn't relief. It was something else. I don't have a word for it. The closest I can get is completed. Like she'd done something difficult and necessary, and the doing of it had settled something inside her, even if it had also taken something out of her. She walked past me very close. I kept my eyes forward, you always do. But she stopped. Right next to me, the marble between us went silent. I didn't move, couldn't move, wasn't my place to. She said very quietly, almost to herself, but not quite. He always said the floor here had a voice. He said you could hear the building think. She wasn't talking to me. Not really. I think she was just speaking the thought out loud, and I happened to be the closest pair of ears. Then she said, also quietly, "Thank you for standing here today." And she walked on. I have replayed that moment about 3,000 times since. The way her voice sounded, the weight of her stick on the marble, the smell of the flowers in the corridor, the fact that I, a corporal in a bearskin, was being thanked by someone for the simple act of standing there while her family said goodbye. I didn't move for the rest of the shift. I mean, I did, obviously, but inside I didn't. Inside I was still standing where she had stopped, and the marble under my boots felt different for the rest of that day. It felt like it was holding something it had been given. I went home that night and I told Maeve. I loved her about 15 times in a row. She asked what had happened. Nothing, long day. Was it a hard one? Yeah, but a good one too. She didn't push. I sat on the sofa with our youngest asleep on my chest, and I thought about the woman with the stick, and the man whose footsteps had given him away, and the kids who had made the marble laugh, and my dad in his hospital bed up north. And I thought about the floor catching all of it. Every footfall, every grief, every joy, every secret. Year after year, decade after decade, century after century. The floor had been there for all of it, long before me, long after me. I was just one in a long line of guards who'd heard it. That was when I started to wonder how many of the old lads in the regiment, going back to my granddad's time and before, had heard the same thing. How many of them had stood on the same marble and listened? How many had been thanked like I had been, by people whose names they'd never know? It made me feel small in a good way. The kind of small you feel under a big sky. Not insignificant, just part of something much, much larger than you.